Well, I know it's hard to believe, but the Ottawa Valley at one time was a bit of a hotbed. And we had neighbors who were into it just as hobbyists. But, you know, our Sunday entertainment was to go to the races. And very early on, I had developed an interest in journalism, and I started writing about the races for, I was writing for the Canadian Sportsman. There was a publication, long forgotten, called the Standardbred Record, then the Standardbred, just filing reports from down there. And as time went along, got through school and all that sort of stuff, I came to the conclusion that I wanted to try my lot working in racing. And in 1980, I got a job as the assistant publicist at Flamborough Downs, working for Charlie Jurovinsky. Stayed there a year, then went to Sportsman for 6 or 7, and then got recruited to Trot Magazine, which was owned at that time by Canadian Trotting Association. Built a team there. We went there for 19 years, I guess it was. Then I left, started the Harness Edge, and here I am doing jog cars. Get it back, I start putting it together. You put the shafts on, they have to be a certain distance apart at the end. Your wheels, you know, you've got all your hardware, the quick hitch connections, and then the apron, and that's it. It was a hell of a lot larger, and there was still the agricultural base, which has disappeared. There were tracks everywhere, it seemed. A lot of fairs even existed then, and a lot of people knew somebody who had a horse, type of thing. It wasn't, they might have thought it was financially driven. It wasn't. It was the idea of owning a good horse and having some fun and all of that sort of thing. It is a bygone era, and I don't like to sound like an old guy, said I remember when, but it was quite different. And there was one horse that really sort of galvanized me. For the Ottawa Valley, he was an open class horse. His name was Early Lakes John. And some very rudimentary people will say had him, but he overcame everything, and he was a terrific horse. And that sort of planted the seed to continue to have an interest in racing. And the entire Sire Stakes were rolling then, and it was a big thing living down there when the boys from up west would come down with their horses, and it just all rolled from there. Let's see, I came up here in 1980, and I was one of the ones that was very critical of all the awards there were. The Canadian Trotting Association had awards, the Canadian Standardbred Horse Society had, the Ontario Jockey Club had, OHA had, and they'd have this banquet. It was a gong show. And the decision-making, at least for CTA, was made by the directors. And a lot of them, they weren't qualified. You know, if you're from an outlying region, you don't know what the hell's going on. So, believe it or not, we were able to, a group of us came together and approached John Hayes, who was president of the CTA at the time, to change this. And we said, we've got a group that we think can do it. And we created the Harness Reporters of Canada. And we were able to structure the O'Brien Awards. We created them. And I think at the time, right off the hop, we were able to get, I think it was 75 or 80 people who covered harness racing in Canada. Now that's incredible to think today. And we created, they had a vote, plus all the race secretaries, plus their assistants. So you had a big core of people, it was over 100 people voting, you know, on the awards. So if you had some bozo said, well, I'm from Quebec, so I'm just going to vote for a Quebec horse, it didn't matter. It would get overruled by the majority. Sanity ruled. Now, you know, when I finished my column at the Hamilton Spectator in November, Nick Oakes in Prince Edward Island does a weekly column for The Guardian. And he and I were the only ones left in all of Canada that covered racing on a regular newspaper beat. I mean, that's sad to think, but that's the way it is. And you know, believe it or not, just as an aside, I have noticed in the last 2 years of COVID, golf, which was a juggernaut one time, it's not getting the coverage in the mainstream media like it used to. Just the other day, Tim Roosevelt, one of the top journalists, died. You know, there wasn't much, if anything, in the mainstream sports media. It's got down to the people making the decisions. They're focused on hockey, basketball, baseball, football. That's everything else is kind of secondary, unless there's some drama like this character who got thrown out of the Australian Tennis Open for non-vaccination or whatever. Anyway, things change, and I mean, it's not going to go back for racing. Racing has a place. It's a niche industry now, and we have to look after what we've got, but make the best that we can of it. I mean, I was looking at just yesterday, Woodbine, which I knew was coming. It was getting the Breeders' Crown. I mean, if their fall schedule wasn't power-packed before, I mean, it just takes your breath away. All the competition that there is. If you like horse racing, you've got to be watching Mohawk in the fall. And it's the best of the best. I always did a lot of question and answer interviews because the people being interviewed liked it because it was a direct quote. They didn't get a chance to read it or whatever, but I tell them right up front, look, we're taping it. Like, it's going down the way it is. I'll clean up the grammar and whatnot, and if there's something comes up you don't want on the record or you want to talk about but not at the record, that's fine. It won't go on the record. That held me in good stead for a long time, always. But there's a couple. One when I was on Trot Magazine, I still giggle about, is D. Wayne Lucas. And I was sitting at home in May of, I think it was 1990 or something like that. And Kentucky Derby was on. And of course, he's front and center, blah, blah, blah. And I got the idea, I'd like to see if I could interview him. So I started chasing him the next week. And it wasn't until December he said, okay, you can come to Santa Anita and we'll do it. And I said, well, no, I don't want to go and you're not there. No, I'll give you my word. So in January I flew there and we did it, and it was a fantastic interview. And he enjoyed it because the questions were so different than what he was getting from the thoroughbred people. And we printed it, and that's when the letters start to pour into the editor suggesting I should have been smothered at birth for having the audacity to put a thoroughbred guy on the cover. But from that came the idea to see if we could get him to come as the guest speaker at the Canadian Horse Racing Hall of Fame induction. And we got him like a bloody rock star rolling in. I mean, the people that year, they filled the place, and which they used to anyway, and the inductees were so flattered that, geez, I shook D. Wayne's hand and all of this sort of stuff. It was great, and I always remember that with him. And then I was very proud of the fact we tried to think out of the box, our group, on different things. There was Heather Mackay-Roberts and Catherine Patchett, who was the most creative person I ever met in terms of graphic arts and all that sort of thing. And my wife, Marion, when she came along. And I thought somebody who would be really interesting would be Dick Pound, head of the World Anti-Doping Agency, because he was on the hunt for Lance Armstrong at the time. Got in touch with him, he agreed, and I met him at Windsor. I had to get up at 4 o'clock to be up there for breakfast to do it. It was fantastic. And in it, he said, well, I don't know very much about horse racing, but I can tell you this, I do understand athletics, and athletes today in any sport, they do not run away from the field. It's impossible to be straight up and do it. In other words, we're cheating. And he said, he listened to a little bit what I explained about racing, and he said racing would be very clever to throw their lot in with us, because this is our purpose in life. Racing terribly dropped the ball. They never picked up. All it would have took is one phone call, and he would have met with them or had his people meet and say, well, this is what we can offer. You can help the cause with all the drug testing and whatever there was. And as everybody knows, he got him. He got Armstrong. Dirty as sin. And we had our share of problems. Things could have been different. Could have been different. And then the third one that kind of struck in my mind, there were a number. One was Brett Pelling. He was leaving to go to Australia. we hadn't seen anything like that before. And I did an interview in Lexington with him about it all. And I knew him quite well, and he was quite open through it all. So I said to him, what about the ownership? Because he had some pretty well-heeled people and so forth, and suddenly he's telling them, I'm gone. He said they were pretty good about it all, and but he said there was one, and he kind of had a pregnant pause, and I said, yeah. And I said, what did this one say? And he looked at me and he said, what about me? In other words, he didn't give a rat's ass about Brett's future or what he was doing. It was just, how did it affect poor me? And great sense of entitlement. And I know it registered with him because the fact he told me that this struck a chord. But I kind of felt bad, you know, when he told me that.